Have you ever opened a new game after peeling back the plastic packaging, waiting patiently for the download to finish, getting to the start menu, and welcome to the tutorial? Ugh! To start this video off, I want to give the actual quote-unquote definition of a tutorial. According to Merriam-Webster, a tutorial is defined as a paper, book, film, or computer program that provides practical information about a specific subject. Huh. That's kinda boring. And like many tutorials done the wrong way, many designers see teaching game mechanics in a very straightforward light. Games can start off boring in that way, but I do think that there are still ways to deliver a stellar tutorial while still teaching the player basic mechanics. I think the best way of discussing game tutorials is by splitting them, albeit very generally, into 3 parts. Level-based tutorials typically seen in side-scrollers/platformers, free-range, open tutorials usually seen in more open-world or exploration-based games, and finally, simple structured demonstration tutorials that are seen often in linear, story-based, or multiplayer games. These aren't the only types, but from my experience, every tutorial is either one of these or a blending of 2 definitions. Beginning with level-based tutorials, I would try to define these as a singular starting point for any video game, meant to serve as an outline for not only level design, but also demonstrate default controls and controller mapping. Now that does sound like a long definition, however, a lot of video games, especially side-scrollers and platformers as mentioned before, employ this tactic of teaching. This definition is also all-inclusive, so you may find a platformer that doesn't include parts of my definition. The most immediate examples I can think of are Mega Man X and Cuphead. I already did a video on Cuphead, but I think it's a pretty good example of a very basic tutorial. As you go across the tutorial, the game directly tells you what to do on the controller. This button jumps, this one shoots, and that one parries. Do it a time or 2 and you'll be able to move on. It's pretty quick, and unless you change the controls, nothing is different between levels. Your growth is all skill-based as you move along. Mega Man X, in my opinion, is a much better example of a level-based tutorial than a lot of other side-scrollers. In fact, Egoraptor/Aaron Hansen from Game Grumps did a Sequelitis video on this game. He goes into a whole lot more detail than I will on it, so I'll link the video in the description if you want to check it out. But the basic gist of the Mega Man X tutorial gives a whole lot more freedom than seen in other games like it. There aren't instructions, it's just to go and figure it out, but the level understands that you're new. There's nothing too crazy to get past, and the game developers assume that you were competent enough to figure it out. Finally! Thank you, Mega Man X designers, for not thinking I've never held a controller or even looked at it once in my life. That's where the biggest problem with level-based tutorials lie. Designers tend to overcomplicate tutorials by thinking that more is equivalent to better. That sucks. It makes every movement less of an experience and more like a learning manual. I just want to hop into the game that I'm playing, and if I need more information, don't throw it at me in a boring way. If I wanted a straightforward button-listed tutorial, I can always access the controls from the settings. Even Cuphead, in all its glory, gets really close to this, and I'd say that the Cuphead tutorial isn't the greatest, but it still feels like you're learning and playing at the same time. Every combo does not need a freeze frame, dialogue shouldn't last forever in the actual level itself, and I shouldn't want to stop playing after the first mission. There's a happy medium that designers have to skirt around, and I'd definitely say that this type of tutorial needs playtesting to see if it grabs at the audience enough. For side-scrollers and games like it, excitement is the key to success. Next up are the free-range/open-world tutorials. I think these are best described as expansive, world-building tutorials meant to introduce game mechanics and provide a basis for immersion in the world around you. This definition is a bit shorter than the last one, but I also think that these tutorials tend to be more general and varied than others. There's usually a lot involved with games that use these tactics, so quote-unquote game mechanics in this sense refers to any functioning part of the experience a player is having. Immersion then comes from individual investment of these experiences being shown. To break it down into two more game examples at hand, I've chosen Skyrim and Dark Souls 3. Both of these games include a relatively open world, seeing as Skyrim is fully open and all of Dark Souls 3's areas are interconnected. To start off, we're going to take a look at the Skyrim tutorial. The beginning of Skyrim, as many of you I'm sure know, opens with a large amount of world building as the player rides towards their appointment of execution. Y'all hear that? Oh, we're just in this now. Oh, wow. Chills. Now we're talking. That's a good hook to a story. After you create your character and see a dragon attack, you're introduced to the mechanics of the game. They're relatively simple, and for the most part, the tutorial is able to flow quickly. The player can make their own pace with how quickly they run through the beginning, and immediately after, they are introduced to the expansive world around them. The most interesting part about this tutorial specifically is the way that it's written. Players aren't only reading the controls, but they're also being exposed to a mini-narrative without realizing it. There's rising action, there's a climax, and there's falling action that leads to a conclusion of the tutorial sequence. It's a pretty well done tutorial overall. It gets you in, and it gets you engaged. Now, to move on, personally, I find a lot of value in the Dark Souls 3 tutorial style. Controls are written notes on the ground instead of paused sequences to introduce you to game mechanics. You don't have to look at anything, you can just go ahead and jump right into the game. You're not bored and you get a chance to discover some stuff on your own. That's important. Nobody likes their hand being held for way too long. And depending on the player, some people don't like being carried around at all. Also, I'd like to mention that the leveling system in Dark Souls 3 is literally perfect in design. Upon my first playthrough's beginning, I had no idea what to upgrade at first, but after studying the game for myself and working with the souls I gained by playing the game, I was able to learn what I needed to get through it. I wasn't treated as someone that isn't capable of learning. People learn. That's how we do everything. Let me learn. I tend to gravitate more towards the Dark Souls 3 approach, but I think this type of tutorial is my favorite from a design standpoint. And that's just me personally. By no means does that force you to like it too. It just made the experience a little bit more fun for me. And finally, we have the simple structure demonstration tutorial. I would say that these are best represented as any tutorial that places you in a low-risk, controlled environment to demonstrate a game's functionality and basic mechanics to be explored through player progression. This one can actually cover a huge host of video games, but like the other styles, I'm going to look at two games that demonstrate these qualities. The first is Overwatch, and the second is going to be For Honor. So, looking at Overwatch's tutorial more, I can really appreciate how it's done. They start you off with a single hero to expose you to the controls and functionality of how the game works. You have abilities, an objective, and you can kill enemies. They don't go through every hero because that takes way too much time, so they give you a button that tells you what the characters do. If you don't know what to do, press that button and it'll tell you how to work a hero. It's pretty basic, but I think this style of tutorial is one of the better versions out there. The actions that you do are kinda boring in the training range, however, mechanically, Overwatch gives you what you need and lets you go. The rest is a trial by fire, which gives the individual a chance to grow on their own. Generally speaking, games such as Overwatch, Call of Duty, or team-based multiplayer games are good at introducing a relatively simple, straightforward experience that is both concise and informative. It gives you knowledge, and then it sends you on your way. The next example that I chose is For Honor. PSA, this is not tutorial footage, but the following footage functions the same. I just couldn't re-access the original one. I would have had to make a new account, and it was a huge big thing. Personally, I think that this tutorial is very good in structure and engagement. It looks similar to all of the other matches that you play both online and throughout the campaign, and the gameplay of the tutorial still remains at a high intensity despite the fact that there are some freeze frames and the environment is relatively controlled. The enemies aren't too tough, but you can still make some mistakes and end up in a bad place. Even with the freeze frames, the basics are completely covered and you are ready to go. Slowness isn't exactly avoided, and I oftentimes see tutorials quite bogged down by these pacing issues. Having these freeze frames where you have to look, memorize, hit a button, go in, and then you get to fight, it seems like they're assuming that waiting is fun, but nobody wants to wait for fun. Waiting isn't fun. I get no speck of joy out of waiting. So stop it. I'm not saying that I'm not learning the mechanics while doing this, but I would rather do it on the move. And that's usually the biggest problem I have in these types of tutorials. I don't want a cutscene getting me to a place where I get introduced to some basic enemy, and then there's a freeze frame being like, attack is the right trigger. Just show me on the screen, I get it, that's all you had to do, just throw me in there, less is more, less is more. But I digress. That's about it. And to sort of recap a little bit, tutorials are much more than starting points. People have to think carefully when opening up a game. I'd say treat it like a story, give it a hook, some action, and let the player know what's going on. That's all you gotta do. If you can do that, you're on your way. I would also like to add that there's no sense in trying to rank these types of things. There is so much variety that games have to offer, and like the games themselves, tutorials appeal to different individuals with different playstyles and different wants or needs. I may like the more open, expansive tutorials, but if you need a little more direction or instruction, that's fine too. Just understand that some games take some time to warm up to because it appeals to other audiences. And hey, take my critiques on these tutorials with a grain of salt. I'm not saying any of them are bad, but some of them just aren't as fun as others. That's all. Thanks. Anyways, I think that's all I have for tutorial talk in this one. Hopefully you enjoyed what you heard and what you saw, and if you have any opinions on game tutorials, leave them in the comments below. I'm really interested to see what you guys think. If you enjoyed this video, maybe you can like it and comment whatever your favorite tutorials are below. And also, if you would like to check out other videos, you can click the little channel tab and check those out. Thanks again, guys. See you later.